Hi Sabina, good morning. I hope things are going well for you as you finish the semester. And I think you have two really good stories here that we can talk about. I'm curious as to which one you want to revise for your portfolio. You only need to revise one, and I think you've done a lot of work on both, so it will be interesting to see which one you choose. I'm going to give you feedback on both so that you can make a decision about which one you want to include in your portfolio. So the portfolio needs 4 of the 5 poems we discussed on the phone, and it also needs 1 of the stories. So I'm hoping that you're spending some time working on the portfolio and it will be ready to go for Sunday. And I think we had a great conversation about your poetry, so I'm hoping some of my feedback on your story will help as well. And I know this is all brand new to you, and I think what's really interesting is that you have a really good way with description. You're very good at giving us details about the characters. I felt like I knew your characters really well in your stories. You gave both physical descriptions of them, and you gave us an idea of how they act, how they speak, how they react to one another. So I think that works really well in your story, especially for some of the first time you're writing it. You're actually writing fiction. So congratulations on that. The first story, I'm leaning a little bit towards it being the story for your portfolio, just because I think we try to do too much in stories sometimes, and what the first story does is just allows a family to be interacting, and it's what I call, it has a lot of good interpersonal conflict in it. So it's a conflict between 2 characters that ends up being resolved by the end of the story, and nothing huge has to happen other than the fact that the characters have to interact and have conversations and figure out their relationships. And I think that's a fine way to do a story and have conflict, and the first story definitely has that. My big suggestion, and I've said this to a lot of students, is to put the story in present tense so it feels like we're immediately in the action with the characters. So that's just simply looking at your verbs and making sure they're in present rather than ed past. And I think what that does is it makes the story more immediate and come alive for us, because we're actually, the story is happening in the characters at the same time we're reading it. So I might shift to all present tense. The other thing for format is whenever the characters are speaking to each other, it really either needs to have quotation marks around the dialogue. So if the mom, Kelly says, "I don't want you to move out," the "I don't want you to move out" needs to be in quotation marks, because it gets confusing when we're moving from the character's thoughts to actions to what they say, and whatever they say has to be in quotation marks. So it needs to be in quotation marks, and really the dialogue should be on its own separate line. So whenever a character's speaking, that can be indented down and on its own line. It's going to make the story kind of long because all of the dialogue then is on its own separate line. But it's the best way to format a story, and it's the easiest way for us to hear what's going on and make sure we know who's saying what. So I might go back into the story and make the dialogue, definitely put quotation marks around it, but maybe make it each on its own line as well. And I can help you format that if you need any help. So those are some formatting things in both of your stories that you should look at. The first story, I said to kind of just drop us right into the middle of the action. We don't need maybe all of that information about the daughter, Kelly, at first, that whole first paragraph. We can discover that later, and some of it's not really necessary for us to know. We know that she's moving, she's a college student. Maybe that can be in the story later, but I wouldn't start there. I would start with Kelly drives her red Nissan to their family home in Jamaica, Queens, and then let the scene play out from there. I think, like I said, you have some really nice details about the mom walking out, and the way she's in a bathrobe and her daughter's dressed up. I like the contrast of those 2 things. You have really nice things about later on, they're in the kitchen. She looks very sad. Her beautiful brown eyes are sparkling. She's fighting back tears. It shows how much the mother cares for the daughter. And what I'm not understanding, I think, conceptually in the story is why this is so hard for the mother. And I was almost expecting her to be sick, or for her um, to be needy of the daughter in some other way. And I think maybe it just might be cultural. This might be a family where it's part of their culture that the children stay in the family home longer. So I think we need some sense of, I know that when I went to college, my mom couldn't wait to get rid of me. So this is a unique family in which this is a very difficult thing for the mother in ways that the typical American family it's not difficult for. So we might, if this is part of maybe a culture, then let them be who they are in their culture. Maybe give them the ethnic names that they would have, and set them in a culture in which it's difficult to watch the daughter go. Because I don't know that the typical American family that's as difficult for, unless there's something with the mother that complicates that issue, if that makes sense. So sort of a better idea of why the mother is so upset, and if it's cultural, play that up. And if it's that she's sick, or she's maybe has mental health issues, then give us a sense of that. So that I think you have a great description. I love how the brother plays into it some, and he's like sneaks out of the room and he's like, I don't want to be in this, and how the sister goes over and kisses him and he doesn't think it's cool. I think you do a nice job of showing how these characters would react to each other. And I also like how the mother, sort of the conversation with the mother escalates, and she gets really upset with the daughter on page 4, and the daughter kind of needs a break and she's got to walk away from it. I think you play up that moment of tension really well, and I would just make sure the dialogue is on its own separate line. And this might be a good moment for us to realize why the mother is so upset about the daughter leaving. It can't just be that she's saying things like she's breaking up the family and things like that, just because she's moving to a different apartment. I don't think moving out usually causes that reaction in a mother. And just a better sense of why she's so upset. So then Kelly walks outside, and I want you to describe a little bit of the setting, the neighborhood that they live in, just to get a sense, the sight, smell, sounds of her taking that walk. And then you have the father enter, and I really like the father's character. I think he's very empathetic, and I think that works really well for the story, to have sort of the mother very upset, the daughter in a moment of tension, and then the father being the voice of reason and empathy. I think that was a nice interpersonal moment. So then we get a resolution. I like the last dialogue that they're having with each other, and I would just, again, put it on separate lines, and I might end that the three of them run into the car away from the rain. I think that's a great ending. I don't think we need the rest of it where that weekend they choose furniture, because I think we know that that's going to happen. So those are some suggestions for the first story. The second story is really interesting. You have this young woman who thinks she wins a trip to Africa, to the Ivory Coast, which is a fascinating setting for anyone in America. We think that's just luxurious, and that, what is the Ivory Coast? Where is that? What does that look like? And I think most of the story centers around not on this trip to the Ivory Coast, which would be more interesting, but it centers on the fraud. And I think that's a great conflict in the story, is that she has been she's been duped, right? And now she's a young woman in Africa by herself, and she meets this other character where Maya, who is this lovely woman who's helping her. I think that's good. I just think a lot of the story centers not on this, this beautiful place she's going, the Ivory Coast. She lands at this hotel. The only moments really where I get a sense of the place is when she hears the percussion band. She lands in the airport that has that beautiful name. She has a conversation with Maya about how they're going to go to these tourist attractions that sound beautiful, the largest Christian church in the world. It's almost like I want the story to focus a little bit more on, yes, she's probably in this state. Let's reach the moment of tension sooner, where she realizes, maybe there's this one moment where she realizes she's been duped, and we don't keep going back to that. We just know, okay, I'm in Africa, and I'm a victim of fraud, but now I'm going to just go and have this lovely time. And I think the story should peak like on the second page. She realizes she's in Africa and it's a fraud. But then the rest of the story, I think, needs to describe the moments that she's having in Africa so that we can really get a sense of that country. And I know that takes a little bit more work in condensing some of the parts where she reaches the moment of, oh gosh, I'm in an airport in Africa. I've been duped, but I need to now go enjoy this beautiful country. And it brings those two things together, this kind of fear of this fraud, but then the independence of her then enjoying the country. And let us, maybe the second part of the story is us really seeing these beautiful things that she's seeing and really seeing the Ivory Coast, because many of us have never been there. And I know that's a little bit more work in the second story, so you can decide where you want to put your energy. One story needs to be revised, and you might find that the adjustments in the first story are a little bit easier than the second. I think the second could be really interesting. She's, again, realizes this terrible things happen to her, but she makes the best out of it, and we go and see this beautiful country, even in the midst of it. So I hope that's helpful, and feel free to pick up the phone and give me a call or shoot me an email if you didn't understand any of my suggestions. I think you have two strong stories to work from, and I really look forward to seeing the revisions of some of the poetry we talked about, and then also these stories. So good luck as you finish up, and let me know if you need anything. And it's been lovely working with you. Thanks, Sabine.